Welcome to Trending Unpacked, the show where we break down what everyone is talking about and why.
And right now, it seems like you can't escape it. I mean, whether you're just glancing at news alerts on your phone or, trying to figure out if that crazy post on social media is true, the entire conversation is being dominated by one thing: the threat of a government shutdown.
Absolutely. The chatter has just exploded. It's gone from this kind of background hum to a deafening roar online.
It really has.
And you can see what's driving it. There are these new, very public political standoffs happening in Washington.
Right.
Then you have these budget deadlines that feel like they come around faster and faster every year.
Yeah.
And on top of that, just a flood of commentary. Some of it is really helpful, but a lot of it feels like it's just designed to make people anxious.
And all that leads to this huge spike in public attention and, a ton of confusion for people who are just trying to figure out what it means for them.
It's the perfect storm, really. You have this complex political process meeting modern digital amplification.
That's a great way to put it. And the materials we've looked at show this incredibly clear link. The minute the rhetoric gets hotter in Congress, public uncertainty just skyrockets.
And that uncertainty translates directly into what we see trending.
Exactly. Frantic Google searches, a huge amount of media coverage that can sometimes blow things out of proportion. So our mission today is really to cut through all of that noise. We're going to use these sources to give you a clear and structured understanding of what a federal government funding lapse actually means.
So we're going to clarify what services are truly affected.
Right. We'll separate the facts from the viral exaggeration and maybe explain the deeper political reasons why this whole cycle has become a seemingly permanent feature of how we're governed now.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's a huge topic. I think we have to start with the most basic question, the one that's buried under all the political commentary. What is a government shutdown, technically speaking?
It's so important to be precise here because the term itself sounds so chaotic. But technically, a U.S. federal government shutdown happens specifically when Congress fails to pass the laws needed to fund the government.
The appropriations bills.
The appropriations bills, exactly. Or the other scenario is if the president refuses to sign that legislation into law. At its absolute core, it's a procedural failure. A failure to authorize the flow of money for the next fiscal period.
So it's not some kind of emergency declaration or a collapse of the country. It's more like the legislative branch just didn't finish its homework on time.
That's a pretty good analogy. And if those checks aren't signed, if the money's not authorized, then the default state for a big part of the federal government is essentially pause.
Pause, I like that word.
And that lack of authorization has an immediate and very specific consequence. It triggers what's called a furlough of non-essential personnel, and it pauses non-essential operations.
And this is the part that causes so much confusion, right? The distinction between what's essential and what's not. It's a partial stoppage.
It is a partial stoppage. That is the key. Operations that are classified as essential, and we will definitely get into what that means, they keep going. But for a lot of other things, the lights basically go out until Congress can reach a deal.
That distinction really does dictate everything that follows. But before we get to the real-world impacts, let's stick with the why. Why is this trending now? Why does this crisis point seem to pop up with such, predictable regularity?
It is entirely tied to the calendar. The federal government's fiscal year starts on October 1st.
Okay.
By law, Congress is supposed to have passed 12 separate individual appropriations bills to fund all the different parts of the government for the whole year. When they can't do that, which, let's be honest, happens a lot these days because of how divided things are,
Right.
they have to fall back on a temporary stopgap measure. And that's known as a continuing resolution, or a CR.
The continuing resolution. I feel like I hear that term every few months. It sounds like the political version of hitting the snooze button on your alarm clock. You're just delaying the fight.
That is a perfect description of the role it plays. And the sources we looked at really highlight the big structural problems these CRs create. A CR is passed to keep the money flowing, sure, but here's the catch. It generally just locks in the previous year's spending levels.
Oh, I see. So it's not a new budget. It's just an extension of the old one.
Exactly. And that creates a ton of friction.
Because if a CR just keeps the status quo, it means you can't start any new programs, you can't adjust funding for inflation or new needs, and you definitely can't implement any new policy priorities that might need more or less money.
Precisely. So for any political party or faction that desperately wants to change spending levels, either by making big cuts or by funding new things, the CR is just deeply unsatisfying. It essentially freezes the policies of the past in place.
So the failure to pass a real budget or even to agree on the terms of a temporary CR, that's what creates this high-stakes deadline. It forces everyone to negotiate with a giant clock ticking down.
And that's where the leverage game really starts. It's not just a simple debate over how many dollars go where. It becomes a structural way to try and force your opponent's hands.
Right. It's about using the deadline as a weapon.
It's all about harnessing the power of that deadline. These standoffs happen because the political parties have, fundamentally irreconcilable disagreements on huge, often very emotional issues. They'll clash over the total amount of spending or funding for specific social programs. Border security is a huge one.
And what you see a lot are these things called policy writers.
Yes, let's talk about policy writers. It's a bit technical, but it is absolutely critical to understanding the gridlock.
So what are they exactly?
A policy writer is basically a rule, a legislative command, that gets attached to a must-pass funding bill. It has nothing to do with the amount of money. It's all about how that money can be used, or maybe blocking a certain government activity from happening at all.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. A group in Congress might demand that, say, funding for the Environmental Protection Agency only gets passed if a rider is included that blocks the agency from enforcing a certain new clean air rule.
Wow.
Or they could try to use a rider to specifically defund a particular office that's focused on a politically sensitive topic.
So a faction can basically hold the entire government's funding hostage until their specific policy demand, this rider, is accepted.
Yeah.
Even if that policy could never pass as a standalone bill.
That's the strategic use of it. It weaponizes the budget process to achieve policy goals. The sources are very clear on this. The threat of a shutdown is used by political actors as leverage. They want to force concessions.
And they're betting that the public outcry and the economic pain from a shutdown will pressure the other side to give in before the deadline hits.
It is political brinkmanship of the highest order.
And that whole setup perfectly explains why this story just explodes and dominates the news within a matter of days. It's a built-in countdown.
The timeline of public interest is incredibly precise. The data shows shutdown talk really accelerates and just takes over the news cycle in that 10 to 14-day window right before a potential funding lapse.
That countdown is the engine driving all the public anxiety.
It is. As the deadline gets closer, the media coverage gets more intense, which gives politicians this massive platform to, air all their grievances publicly.
And that very public fight then connects directly to the viral moment we're all seeing online right now.
It's a straight line. When you have high-profile politicians clashing on social media, pointing fingers, making these huge maximalist demands, it turns what is an institutional disagreement into a spectator sport.
And the viral ecosystem loves conflict and deadlines.
It absolutely does. And that's what creates this feedback loop. You start to see viral posts predicting all these catastrophic disruptions, some based in reality, some just pure speculation. Those posts get combined with the news media's countdown clocks, and the direct result is a massive immediate spike in Google searches.
All fueled by confusion. People go from just listening to the political fight to actively searching. Okay, but how does this actually affect me?
That is the absolute core driver of the trend. When the rhetoric gets that extreme, people need clarity. They start worrying about their Social Security check or their own paycheck or whether their flight next week is going to take off. That fundamental personal worry is what fuels the entire digital echo chamber around a shutdown threat.
Okay, that gives us the context we need on the politics and the media side. Let's pivot now to the practical stuff, the part that really impacts people's wallets and their daily routines. We need to detail who is actually affected, what stays open, what closes, and try to do it with realism, without sensationalizing it.
Let's start with the operational reality of essential services. The sources are definitive on this. Essential services keep operating without any interruption, even if the funding legislation has technically lapsed.
And essential is usually defined as things necessary for public safety, national security, right?
That's the practical definition, yes. Or functions that are funded outside of this immediate annual budget fight.
So what are some specific examples?
Well, all military operations continue. Troops stay on duty, defense systems stay active. That's non-negotiable.
Okay.
Domestically, you have critical safety services like the TSA security checkpoints at airports and air traffic control. They continue to operate.
Which means, and this is a big point of confusion, planes generally still fly and you still have to go through security.
You absolutely do. And maybe most critically, Social Security and Medicare payments continue to go out. That's because they are funded through permanent, mandatory appropriations or trust funds, not these annual discretionary bills that are being fought over.
So that continuity in those really foundational areas is guaranteed.
Yeah.
But let's clarify the really strange reality for the people who are staffing those essential posts. The TSA agents, the air traffic controllers, the service continues, but what happens to their pay?
That is the real human cost of being deemed essential. You have hundreds of thousands of these critical workers who are legally required to show up for duty. They have to be there to protect life and property. but they're often forced to work without pay.
Wow. So they're performing these vital jobs, knowing their next paycheck might be delayed for weeks, maybe even a month.
Exactly. They have to rely entirely on the expectation, which is based on historical precedent, that Congress will eventually approve back pay for them once the government reopens.
But relying on that historical guarantee must be a massive financial stressor for families. You're trying to manage your life without knowing when your next paycheck is actually going to arrive.
It creates immediate cash flow crises. You can imagine, especially for federal workers who might be on the lower end of the pay scale.
Hmm.
This kind of disruption is huge for trying to budget, pay your rent, manage any debt you have.
Okay, now let's talk about the other side of the coin, the non-essential services. The part that the public sees pause almost immediately.
The most visible closures are always the recreational and cultural places that people interact with directly. So many national parks will close their gates. Federal museums will shut down.
And it's not just about losing access to culture, right? I mean, with the national parks, if there are no rangers or maintenance staff, that can lead to real problems.
Oh, absolutely. When you close those services, you can see trash overflowing, sanitation systems can fail. There can even be safety issues if certain areas are left completely unstaffed and unprotected. It's more than just an inconvenience.
Yeah, we saw that pretty vividly during that longer shutdown a few years back. It can actually damage public lands.
Yeah.
But then there's the hidden bureaucratic friction, which probably affects even more people.
For sure. We move from the visible closures to these administrative slowdowns that can cause massive headaches for people. For instance, IRS processing, it can get severely delayed.
How so?
Well, the automated systems for filing your taxes might continue to work, but all the complex human-intensive tasks, things like conducting an audit, processing an amended return, or handling a complex taxpayer question, those often stop entirely.
Because the non-essential staff who do that work are furloughed.
Exactly. So if you're waiting for a complicated refund or you're trying to resolve a serious tax issue with a human being, that whole process just freezes in place.
And what about services we rely on for, documents and travel? Passport processing is a huge concern that comes up in the sources.
It's a classic example of this bureaucratic friction. You might have essential workers who continue to physically print the passports, but the huge administrative staff that's needed to process the applications, to verify all the documents, to handle public inquiries, a lot of that staff gets furloughed.
So the result is an immediate slowdown.
A sharp, immediate slowdown in processing speed. Delays for passport applications can suddenly stretch for weeks, even months, creating huge travel problems and, you can imagine, a lot of public frustration.
And I assume it's the same for things like federal call centers.
Availability just plummets. It becomes nearly impossible to get a person on the phone to ask a question about complex regulations or maybe a benefit program.
Let's really dig in on the people who bear the brunt of this. The federal workforce, but also the contractors. We've talked about how direct federal employees get back pay eventually, but the situation for contractors seems way more precarious.
This is maybe the most critical distinction for people to understand. When a shutdown happens, yes, hundreds of thousands of direct federal workers face these painful pay delays, but they do have the security of knowing that back pay is guaranteed by law.
But the material we have shows a completely different story for federal contractors. These are the people providing IT support or janitorial services or security or cafeteria
The
management.
hidden workforce.
Yeah.
And they're often impacted much more severely. And the reason is simple. For contractors, back pay is just not guaranteed.
So why not?
Their contract is tied to the agency's budget authority. If that agency's non-essential work is frozen, the specific task they were hired to do just vanishes. Their contract gets immediately suspended or even terminated.
And they lose that income completely.
They lose that income, and Congress almost never approves retroactive payments for those lost wages.
So while the direct federal employee is struggling with a delayed paycheck, the contractor is struggling with permanently lost income. That could be devastating.
It creates immediate and sometimes permanent financial strain for those families. And many of them were already in service sector or lower wage roles to begin with.
It's a massive vulnerability in the system.
It really is. And it shows that cascading effect of a shutdown. It reaches deep into the private sector and into local economies, and it often hits the most financially fragile workers the hardest. That's a piece of the story that often gets overlooked in the broader conversation.
Let's circle back to the major benefit programs. We confirmed the Social Security and Medicare payments continue, but I want to explore what you could call the administrative paradox of these programs. The money's there, but getting it to people efficiently can still get complicated, right?
This is the administrative nightmare of a long shutdown. Because programs like Social Security and Medicare are what's called mandatory spending, funded by trust funds, the actual benefit checks do keep flowing. The disruption isn't the loss of the benefit itself.
Okay, so a retiree is still going to get their monthly check. That's the good news. But what if that person needs help with a complex claim? Or what if someone is trying to apply for the first time?
That's exactly where the paradox hits. The administrative staff, the people responsible for processing new applications, resolving disputes, doing quality assurance reviews, managing complex enrollment issues, many of those workers are deemed non-essential and get furloughed.
So the automated system of sending out checks keeps running.
But the ability to service the public, especially new applicants or people with complicated problems, slows dramatically. Sometimes it stops altogether. The whole system of delivery just becomes degraded.
That has to be incredibly frustrating. The money is legally guaranteed to you, but the government's ability to operate the human side of that safety net just grinds to a halt.
Take a program like SNP, which used to be called food stamps, or WIC. The sources note that while the federal funds for the benefits might be secure for a short period, the state-level administration of those programs depends heavily on federal resources and coordination.
So if a shutdown drags on,
If it's prolonged, the ability of state agencies to process new applications or to recertify current recipients can face severe delays. A new family that's seeking help might find the door is effectively closed, even though the overall program is still funded.
the system is there to catch people, but the gears of that system are subject to this political game in Washington.
It really highlights the fragility of the whole administrative infrastructure during these political fights. The essential money might flow, but the systems that support human interaction and timely help degrade very, very quickly.
And finally on this, we have to look at the overall economic ripple effect. Because playing this high-stakes political game isn't free. It has a literal massive cost.
It is deeply expensive. The sources are pretty clear that shutdowns historically cost the U.S. economy billions of dollars, and that number climbs every single day it goes on.
And it's not just about the lost productivity from furloughed workers.
That's a big part of it, but there are other compounding factors that drive that multi-billion-dollar price tag up. You have delayed federal contracts, which stops commerce and investment in its tracks.
And the local impact.
A huge local impact, especially in communities near federal centers like Washington, D.C., or near big military bases. You have hundreds of thousands of furloughed workers who just stop spending money on restaurants, on childcare, on retail. That hits local businesses hard.
And there must be a cost to just shutting down and restarting, right?
Absolutely. There's a significant administrative expense just in the process of shutting down, informing everyone, securing all the facilities. And then eventually you have the chaotic and expensive process of restarting all those federal operations again.
It's an unbelievably inefficient and costly way to have a political argument.
It is. It creates all this economic drag just to try and force a policy concession, and the cost ends up being paid by the very taxpayers the government is supposed to be serving.
And the historical data on this is clear, right? The longer it goes on, the more damaging the costs become.
It becomes exponentially more damaging, often dwarfing the original amount of money that was even being argued about in the first place.
Okay, so we've established the mechanics of the budget, the political motives, and the very real fact-based impacts on people and services. Let's jump into the environment where most of us actually interact with this crisis. The digital echo chamber.
Yeah.
How is this really complex, nuanced reality being discussed and, well, often distorted online?
This is where the cultural processing of the whole thing happens. I mean, shutting down the government, even partially, it's this profound symbol of systemic political dysfunction.
Right, it feels like something is broken.
Exactly. And that political spectacle creates this nationwide uncertainty, and that uncertainty becomes a core part of the online conversation. It's a moment where this huge institutional failure meets viral culture head-on.
And when high-stakes politics and gridlock hit the internet, that frustration often comes out as dark humor and cynicism.
We see that everywhere. The prevalence of memes that frame the whole shutdown situation as political theater. It's the public's way of processing their frustration. And sometimes, it's expressing a really deep-seated cynicism about the competence of their leaders.
It's a coping mechanism.
It's a coping mechanism, but it also reflects this pervasive feeling of helplessness when you see politicians fighting over your potential paycheck or your ability to take a trip.
But underneath all the humor, the fear is very real, and the confusion is palpable. And that confusion, as we said, is what drives the search for clarity.
It really is. The sources clearly document this. That public anxiety prompts a massive spike in search traffic as people are actively, desperately trying to get clear answers and fact-check the viral posts they're seeing.
Let's get specific. What are the most common anxiety-driven search queries that are spiking on platforms like TikTok and X during these moments? What are people most afraid of?
They're intensely focused on immediate personal disruption. The questions are simple, but they're loaded with financial anxiety. Which services stop? That's the foundational one.
Okay.
Then you get, do I still get paid? Which is the direct financial strain. But the most specific fear, and often the most exaggerated one that goes viral, is, will flights be grounded?
That flights grounded question is fascinating because we've already confirmed that air traffic control and the TSA are essential services. So why does that specific fear persist and trend so aggressively?
It's such a powerful example of how viral misinformation can just steamroll operational reality. The fear is highly resonant because air travel is, a vital, high-consequence activity for a lot of people.
So if someone posts an alarmist take saying the government's shut down, don't even bother going to the airport, that's what gets amplified.
That's what gets amplified. The sources point out that you'll see influencers trying to explain the shutdown consequences, and sometimes they're just inaccurate. They contribute to this generalized panic because they lack the necessary nuance about that essential versus non-essential distinction.
They don't account for the trust funds or the legal definitions that govern national safety.
Right. So the most hyperbolic posts, the ones predicting the absolute worst outcomes, a complete halt to all travel, or Social Security checks immediately stopping, those are the posts that get the most attention. And they create this cycle of panic amplification.
It's like the online conversation just merges the political storm with a potential disaster movie scenario.
That's a great way to put it. We see these viral panic posts that claim severe, immediate calamity for the IRS, for airports, for core benefit programs. And the key insight from all the sources is that these claims are almost always overstated when you compare them to the factual reality we detailed.
The reality where the military, air traffic control, and core benefits continue, even if there's a lot of administrative friction behind the scenes.
Exactly. It seems that the fear itself becomes the trending topic, and it often overshadows the complex, kind of boring bureaucratic details that we've been trying to clarify. The public reacts to the big, scary headline of shutdown rather than the footnotes about non-essential furloughs.
That's just the dynamic of the digital age, I suppose.
I think so. The operational reality, the specific list of furloughed services and delayed passport applications, it's complicated. It's hard to turn into a meme. The political spectacle, the image of gridlock and national failure, that's simple, it's emotionally resonant, and it goes viral instantly.
What a powerful illustration of how closely our national politics, our daily lives, our ability to travel, our access to benefits, our paychecks, and the sheer velocity of online culture are all intersected. The moment that clock starts ticking in Washington, it immediately becomes a meme and an anxiety-driven search query everywhere else.
That really is the ultimate takeaway here. The recurring nature of these shutdown moments is highly instructive. It forces this temporary transparency on how our federal systems actually operate during a crisis. And it also exposes how quickly that political brinkmanship translates into widespread public anxiety, which creates fertile ground for misinformation.
And so understanding the fact-based reality, which services are truly essential, that crucial difference between a furloughed federal employee and a laid-off contractor, and how the economic costs add up, all of that allows you to distinguish the political show from the operational reality.
It helps you filter the noise.
You can ignore the viral post saying all flights are going to stop and instead focus your attention on whether your specific passport application might be delayed or, what local support might be available for contractors in your own community.
Exactly. Knowing the structure of the crisis helps you navigate it. Shutdown threats have really moved beyond being these isolated political events. They've become recurring high-stakes flashpoints in modern U.S. governance. They are a predictable, cyclical feature of a highly polarized budget process.
An expensive and painful lesson in the inner workings of our government played out over and over again on the national stage.
Indeed. And it just underscores the enduring need for reliable, nonpartisan sources of information when the political rhetoric is at its loudest and most anxiety-inducing.
That is a perfect place to wrap this up. Thank you so much for helping us unpack that crucial distinction between what's essential, what's exaggerated, and the deeply human costs of this procedural failure.
My pleasure. It was necessary to get these facts out there as clearly as possible.
And for you, the listener, we hope this clarifies the often obscured reality behind those alarming headlines. We want to leave you with one final thought to consider. Given how cyclical and predictable these shutdown threats have become, how much longer can the political system rely on this tactic as leverage before that guarantee of back pay for essential workers ceases to be a functional guarantee, and the entire system faces an operational crisis far worse than just a temporary funding lapse? Something to think about as we move forward.
That's a question that the sources suggest is becoming more and more pressing.
We'll leave that with you. Next episode, we're unpacking why Jeffrey Epstein is suddenly exploding across search trends again, and what's behind the renewed discussion.
You will not want to miss that.
We'll see you next time on Trending Unpacked.